Hello and welcome. If you're considering seeing a therapist, but you're not sure what kind of therapy you would want or would work for you, or what to pay attention to when you talk to someone who might work with you and what kind of techniques they would use, what kind of ways they have of helping you get better, then you might want to watch this video, because in this video I'm going to explain to you what the most important element is, arguably, in therapy, which is being undervalued today, which is actually quite often not being done at all, but it's the most important element of healing a neurotic disorder. So first let me talk about how I came upon this, how I know that this element is important. That's just my personal experience, having a difficult childhood, being bullied, different things happened in my past that I was still suffering from, but I had no idea, right? And so I did this personal development, I went into personal development, I did this retreat. The retreat was called Primal Childhood Deconditioning. It's very good. I had no idea what I was in for, but basically what you do in this retreat is you go back to your childhood and you remember what it felt like to be a child. And then also you remember the pain of whatever you didn't get as a child, or whatever bad things happened as a child that basically bothered you to a level that is still bothering you, which was too much to integrate, too much to bear, the pain was too big. Basically you don't remember it today, but it's still bothering you and it's causing your symptoms. In that retreat we basically got a complete experience of what it was like to be young, to be vulnerable, remembering things that you didn't quite remember before, remember how it felt, remember what was painful, remember what things you might still be angry about, what that child self of you might still be angry about, etc. And I was surprised how much crying, how much screaming, how much pain came out, and how much better I felt afterwards. One of the results of doing that was that I got a 70% increase in my self-esteem. And I had no idea basically why that worked, how that worked, but that was my first experience with this. Now, I thought this was a very obscure thing to go back and feel what was unfelt, could go back and feel your unfelt pain. Turns out it's there's many names for it. Some people call it regression therapy, some people call it reliving, some people call it trauma reliving, some people call it primal therapy is the most advanced, the most refined version of it, and this was invented in the 60s, I believe, by Jung. He popularized it, and my understanding was almost nobody knows about this primal therapy, and it turns out that actually this hasn't been invented by Jung. This has been actually Freud writes about this. Sigmund Freud, the good old Sigmund Freud writes about this. And he says that in his book Studies in Hysteria, which was written by Freud and Breuer, and it was published in 1895, and he already writes about this way of, like, this element of the healing process. And I've looked up a quote for you. So what he says on page 11 is, hysterics suffer from the most part from reminiscences. So hysterics is a word that was popular in the 19th century, probably also the 20th century, and it basically means people who have, some sort of psychological problem. It was really not very advanced, there were not very many terms for it. Basically, a hysteric is someone with a psychological problem. That's the way I understand it. So you have to read it as that. Like, psychotherapy was not very advanced. It's still not very advanced. But that's what he said. Like, they suffer from the most part from reminiscences. What does that mean? Reminiscences are things that are old, things that you remember, but that are not consciously remembered. So basically you can read this as pain that is coming up from the past, and you're reminiscing it, but you're suffering from it because it's not conscious that you're reminiscing it. It's stored pain that is bubbling up to the surface, and it's coming out in the present moment. You're projecting it on the present, and it seems like reality is some type of way that you felt before. So if reality seems depressing now, it's just because of pain that is coming up when you were young. He also writes, the psychical process that had originally taken place has to be repeated in as vivid a way as possible, brought to its status nascendi, and then talked through. This makes any phenomena involving stimuli, cramps, neuralgias, hallucinations, appear once more at full intensity and then vanish forever. Okay, so what he's basically saying is, if you have neurotic problems, this could be any psychological disorder basically. This is very broad strokes, right? I'm not saying this is entirely correct, but this was his intuition, and he wrote this in a book. That if you're suffering psychologically, then that is because you have reminiscences, stored old painful memories, messing with you. What needs to be done is going back to those, talking through them in as much detail as possible, feeling them, feeling the pain of that, and then the symptoms that it causes intensify and then they disappear. This is the basics of what one does in regression therapy, in trauma, reliving, and also what one does in primal therapy. So this was published in 1895. Even before that, this was already being done. There was a successful case of curing someone of hysterical psychosis in 1851. So 1851, there was this guy named Andries Hoek. He was a Dutch guy. I don't think he was a psychotherapist, but he managed to cure someone who had hallucinations, suicidal depression, dissociative symptoms, and pseudo-epileptic seizures. So she was suffering from what then was called madness. And her name was Rika van Bay. She was 22 years old at the time. She had been mad for 5 months, and she was basically going to be shipped off to an institution to be kept there as a prisoner forever, because that's what you did in those days. You basically locked them up and tortured them, because no one knows how to cure them. He took on this patient. What he did with her, was he hypnotized her so that she could be calmed down. So if he didn't hypnotize her, she was too mad. She was raving or seizing on the floor or whatever. Like, she could not be reasonably talked to. But if she was under hypnosis, she could be calm. What he did was he brought her under hypnosis. Under hypnosis, she knew exactly what painful memories she was suffering from. She could calmly talk through them, and then she could set an intention to relieve those painful memories during her seizures when she came out of the hypnosis. So they did a combination of conscious integration, which is calmly talking through what painful thing happened, and then also reliving the pain and feeling it, which she did during her seizures. But it's the same combination of calmly talking through what happened in detail, but also feeling it and also reliving it physically as a physiological experience. Now, this was in 1851, took 11 months, and then afterwards she was cured of her hysterical psychosis. Now, this upsets me a little bit, because this is a record of someone being cured of something that today might be categorized as schizophrenia or psychosis, or I'm not so sure what it would be categorized as. But what's clear is that he cured her, and nobody seems to even remember that that's possible. Because I don't think that today people would focus on, oh, you're suffering from psychosis, let's dig out some painful memories, help you feel them so that your symptoms disappear or gradually decrease, which is something that clearly works. Freud talked about it, Andries Hoek talked about it, Pierre Janet talks about it. Okay, now, today, if you're going to see a therapist, you might probably run into someone who wants to practice talk therapy on you. Could be cognitive behavioral therapy, could be dialectic something therapy, and all of that basically works with your conscious mind. So you're kind of trying to understand where your behaviors are messing you up, where your beliefs are messing you up, where your emotional reactions are messing you up, and you learn better coping strategies, you learn better habits, you basically train yourself to think in a different way, train yourself to do little tricks whenever something happened, have a better, healthier frame of mind. And that's basically as deep as it goes. That's not curative. It can be improving your life. It can be saving your life. It can definitely be helpful, but it's not resolving the original source of the problem. And what is actually resolving the original source of the problem? And so it's a combination of physically reliving the emotional pain of some past memory that is at the root of a problem you have, and also conscious integration, which means you need to be consciously present while it happens. And this is what actually cures. This is what actually cures many psychological problems or diminishes the impact of them. This is what basically removes what's at the root of it. So, Sigmund Freud talked about this. And then for a while, Freudian psychoanalysis was popular. And this was a part of Freudian psychoanalysis. People would talk about painful things that happened to them in the past, painful childhood stuff. They would express their pain, and that would cure their symptoms. This has been described many times. It's been taken out of psychoanalysis. It's been practiced less and less. Today, we still see Freud as one of the forefathers of psychology and psychotherapy, but we don't really favor that method of working. Why is that? I think it's pretty sad. Why is that? So there could be, I'm just gonna speculate now, but what I think is that we don't have an emphasis on going through therapy in order to be able to give therapy. So if you don't go through a therapeutic process yourself, you're not going to understand deeply why it works and what exactly makes it work. Because this is a very personal inner experience that you need to have. People who go to a university and then do internships in order to become a psychologist and be able to practice psychotherapy, they're only used to studying with their conscious mind, integrating knowledge in their head, and then basically they're just working from their heads. They're not having, they miss the inner deep experience of what it's like to relive and heal something. Therefore, they're just working like out of the knowledge that they have stored in their cortex. So if you're very used to working off knowledge that you have stored in your cortex, using logic, using analysis, and using facts and things that you've learned but you haven't really experienced, then you're very likely to favor thinking over feeling. And if you're very likely to favor thinking over feeling, then in the therapy that you practice with other people, you're going to likely want to skip over the feeling. There's a deeper reason for this, and that's because it's very confronting to help someone feel their past pain, because it reminds you of your own unfelt past pain. And this is the societal disease that we have, which is basically everyone has some repressed memories that are painful. We're basically almost all of us are in denial about that, and we don't want to have anything in our lives that reminds us of that, right? So it's basically everyone, and when I say everyone, I'm generalizing. I'm saying most people, including many people who do an education in order to become a therapist and then become a therapist, most people are not aware of the amount of repressed, painful memories that they actually have. But then they subconsciously avoid anything that might bring that to the surface. And that is a completely unconscious process, but then you also have a bias against helping someone else relive their pain, relive their trauma. Why? Because if you see that, you might feel it yourself, and that's very uncomfortable. This is a deep bias that we have. It's a bias for like cognitive processes and against feeling. And it's simply because helping someone feel might make you feel. And then shit might come to the surface that you're not ready for. So Sigmund Freud tried to describe this. Pierre Janet tried to describe this. He described it in many books that this is an essential part of therapy. Arthur Jenov described this. He popularized primal therapy, and it was widely accepted, widely popular in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and then it kind of fizzled out. So this is just something that in society we can't seem to really integrate. And in therapy today, you will probably first be referred to someone who practices cognitive behavioral therapy, psychodynamic therapy, I don't know what else there is, but Gestalt therapy, for example, and psychodynamic therapy, psychodrama, all of those, they focus on emotions, but they focus on emotions in the present and what needs to happen in order to heal. You need to focus on the original emotions that were there in the past moment that the pain originated. So, to conclude, if you're watching this video because you're looking to get therapy, then make sure that the person, if you actually want not just like some sort of superficial cure for your symptoms, but if you actually want to get better, like deeply get better, heal the origin of your problems, then make sure that the therapist knows how to get you to feel your past painful memories, to discover which memories are repressed, which memories have pain that you haven't discovered before, and get you to feel them, and make sure that the therapist practice some form of deep feeling with you, which means not just a little bit of tearing, but you need to relive painful memories in these sessions, and you need to be in a state of regression, which means that you're simultaneously aware of the present moment and where you are, simultaneously acutely aware of where you were, what you saw, what you felt, and feeling that and integrating that. If you're looking for a therapist, ask them about their process. Ask them whether they do this as a core part of their work. If they don't, I would say move on, unless you're just looking for a mindset shift. But if you have a deep sense of, I could be living my full potential and I could be doing a lot better than I actually am, then make sure that this is included. Yeah, I've been kind of on a deep dive into therapies and why they work, how they originate. And if you want more of this content, this type of insights, then stay tuned, because I'm on a rampage. I'm on a deep dive. So see you in the next one. Bye.